defeats and cruelties and injustices, or of a past that was some lovely golden age now irretrievably lost. Or we can tell a more complicated and accurate story, one that has room for the best and the worst, the atrocities and the liberations, for grief and jubilation. That's from The Branches Are Hope, and The Roots Are Memory, from Rebecca Solnit. Now, Grants Pass Remembrance is a truth and reconciliation project about our history as a sundown town. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the term sundown town. I am astounded. That is not my experience as I talk with people. And it wasn't until I looked more into it that I learned that there was a name for this. Now, a sundown town is a community that purposefully excludes African Americans and other racial minorities from living in or even passing through their community through a culture of fear, violence, and intimidation. Most often when I share that definition, people say, oh, I know that. I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Now, I moved into town about 10 years ago. And we moved into town because we wanted to be close to family, and we love the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We wanted to be here. I had only been here a couple months before I heard a rumor of a curfew sign that was on the bridge, intentionally saying African Americans need to be out of town after dark. Now, I did a double take. My brother is multi-ethnic, and I wanted to know what that story was. I wanted to make sure that he'd feel welcomed. He was going to be coming to visit us soon. And so I asked questions, and they didn't know really how to answer them. It was kind of a fuzzy history to them, but that's all they knew. And I wanted to hear more. Now, I've come to love Grants Pass, to love our community, to love my neighbors in this place. It's more than a place that my family lives. It's more than a beautiful place in the Pacific Northwest. I love this place. And I've come to know that our story is both beautiful and broken. We reap the benefits of good decisions that have been made in our history, decisions that I wasn't around for, but I still get to benefit from, that still affects me and that fill me with thankfulness. Now, we also reap the brokenness of the decisions that have been made before we came, decisions that I had nothing to do with, but still affect us today and fill me with sadness. However we got here, or whenever we got here, we are all now a part of Grants Pass's story, and it's a part of our story. And our story is not done. Having been a sundown town doesn't have to be how this story ends. And Grants Pass Remembrance exists solely for the purpose of rewriting the ending of that story, of becoming a sunrise community, a community where all our neighbors can feel safe and respected, and like this place is their home. Now, maybe you've been a part of this sundown town for a while by the way that you treat other people. Maybe you want to grow more intentionally into it. Maybe you want to join us as we write the ending in our community of this story. Maybe you have more questions and you want to sit down with one of us and talk about it at Road Roasters or Wheelhouse Coffee. I'd love to do that if you are interested. Wherever you're at, we're in this together. This is our community. And in the midst of our differences and our diversities, we all share a care for our community and for our neighbors. And as you hear the stories that we'll hear later tonight, stories that speak of the ending that is still going, there will be many different emotions that come up. But as it relates to our story as a sundown town, the reality that the ending is still going is one that is full of hope and joy. May you know that hope and joy. May knowing that Grants Pass Remembrance exists in our community fill you with that hope. And if you're interested, we'd love to talk with you more. So on that intermission break, we'll be back there. We've got different articles you can look at. We have a booklet on our history if you'd like to have that. We've got a newsletter sign up if you want to get to hear more about what's going on. If you have stories that relate to this history, we would love to hear them. We gather our oral history as a part of our work. We'll be in the Boatnik Parade, so you can look for us there and cheer us on when we go by, or if you want to join us in walking, feel free to do that. We'll be having a Juneteenth celebration this year, honoring an important chapter in our nation's pursuit of freedom, liberty, and justice. So we look forward to what is to come. We make more of a difference than we know in our community, each of us. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you so much for being a part of that moving forward. Thank you.
To start our Hearth out tonight, we're going to start out with traditional music, and tonight will be the Civil War Band. And they've been in existence for about, should I go up one? Okay, tall one. Thank you. Okay, they are called the 7th Illinois Infantry Regimental Band, and the band members include Dave Renton on the trombone, Jim Hostick on the alto horn, Warren Van Camp on the tenor horn, Janet Knapp on the cornet, Carol O'Neill on the cornet, and Butch Briery on the drums. So when Johnny Comes Marching Home will be the first one, and Comes Dearest, The Daylight Is Gone will be the second song. Okay, thank you. Our first storyteller of the evening is Taylor Stewart. And Taylor graduated from the University of Portland in 2018 with a degree in communication and a master's in social work from Portland State University in 2021. Taylor started the Oregon Remembrance Project in 2018 to help communities unearth stories of injustice and engage in the necessary truth-telling and repair required to reconcile instances of historical harm. His work connects historical racism to its present-day legacies to inspire contemporary racial justice action. In what started as a simple way to memorialize a man named Alonzo Tucker, the most widely documented African-American victim of lynching in Oregon, Taylor has grown to see the power of reconciliation to rectify further instances of historical injustice. Taylor's story is rewriting the ending of stories of historical injustice. Please help me welcome Taylor.
Testing, testing for those in the back. Okay, good. We're good to go. Tonight, I will be sharing with you the story of a man named Alonzo Tucker, Oregon's most widely documented African-American victim of lynching. While this may be a sad story, I have chosen to focus on it because, importantly, it does not have a sad ending. In fact, the end to this story actually gives us hope for the future of our communities. We don't know much about Alonzo Tucker, but we do know that he was born in Maryland, was a boxer in California, was married, and was 28 at the time of his 1902 killing. He was in California at the time of the 1900 census, and we have his address listed at 904 Kearny Street, San Francisco, California. We are unsure the circumstances that brought Alonzo Tucker to Oregon. However, we do know that while he was up here, he operated a gym in a town that was once called Marshfield, presently known today as Coos Bay. We're unsure why he chose to reside in this particular part of Oregon, given that Oregon was hostile to black residents and it would be formally illegal to be black in Oregon until 1926. One guess is that he chose to settle in Marshfield because the area was once home to a diverse mining community. This community was known as Beaver Hill, and during the late 1800s was one of the most diverse pockets in Oregon. We are unsure how long Alonzo Tucker was in Marshfield, but we do know his time there came to a screeching halt on September 17, 1902, when he was accused of sexually assaulting a white woman, the wife of a miner from Libby. Alonzo Tucker was shortly thereafter arrested, and a mob formed in town with the intention of lynching him. In the midst of a police escort out of jail to escape the encroaching mob, Alonzo Tucker escaped and wound up spending the night hiding in the mudflats underneath the local docks. The mob stationed guards across town and kept rotating watch throughout the night for any signs of Alonzo Tucker. The next morning, Alonzo Tucker was found by two young boys who used pellet guns to shoot him out of his hiding place and into the open. Alonzo Tucker would then run down Front Street away from the mob, and despite being shot once in the leg, he managed to run into a shop and cry, "Lord, have mercy on a colored man." There would be no mercy for him, as Alonzo Tucker would then be shot in the upper body. This would leave him incapacitated and allowed the mob to put a noose around his neck and throw him in the back of a cart with the intention of lynching him from the spot of the alleged assault. However, they wouldn't make it that far, as Alonzo Tucker would die from the gunshot wounds. So the mob decided to string up Alonzo Tucker's dead body from a light pole on the old Marshfield Bridge in front of a crowd of 300 and left his body hanging there for several hours. News of this lynching made headlines across Oregon and even across the country. Most newspapers were sympathetic to the lynch mob. One newspaper wrote that, quote, "The crowd which witnessed the last act of the tragedy is estimated at about 300. They were quiet and orderly, and it is safe to say that no such lawless proceedings were ever conducted with less unnecessary disturbance of the peace." Another newspaper wrote that, quote, "The conduct of the Avengers was marked throughout by quiet orderliness, but deadly determination. The sentiment of the community is in sympathy with the lynchers, and it is extremely improbable that any arrests will be made." Despite this all occurring in broad daylight without a masked man in the crowd, no one would ever be held accountable for the lynching of Alonzo Tucker. Following this event, the few African Americans that resided in Marshfield fled the area over the threat of future violence directed towards them. In 1974, a Coos Bay World newspaper reporter interviewed 3 white men who were boys at the time of the 1902 lynching, and they provided eyewitness accounts. All 3 men believed Alonzo Tucker was lynched over a consensual relationship with the woman who accused him of assault. Alonzo Tucker's story would be largely forgotten by history, minus the occasional smatterings of rumor and local legend. The spot where Alonzo Tucker was lynched became a high school soccer field. Few knew his story, even fewer knew the details. However, this would begin to change in the year 2020, when in February, the community of Coos Bay came together for the first ever public acknowledgement of this lynching. Community members gathered on Front Street, near where Alonzo Tucker was shot. A tub of soil had been collected from 3 locations, with each bit of soil representing part of Alonzo Tucker's story. There was soil from the mudflats underneath the local docks, soil from Front Street, and soil from where the old Marshfield Bridge used to be. A ceremony was held to memorialize this soil, and 200 community members were able to physically hold Alonzo Tucker's story in their hands as they transferred the soil into 2 jars. One jar was sent back to a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and the other jar was turned into an exhibit at the Coos History Museum just down the street. This would be the start to a new series of chapters in Alonzo Tucker's story. Fast forward to June 2021, and the community of Coos Bay gathered once again to memorialize Alonzo Tucker's story into Oregon's geographic memory with the unveiling of a historical marker outside the Coos History Museum to honor Alonzo Tucker, and the thousands of other African Americans who were lynched in this country. Over 600 people, double that who were at the 1902 lynching, gathered virtually and in person to add this new chapter to Alonzo Tucker's story. I tell people that there are 2 dates of significance on this historical marker: 1902, when the lynching occurred, and 2021, when the historical marker was unveiled, and that we can't fully understand the story of Alonzo Tucker only focusing on the 1902 date, as his story now continues on into 2020 and 2021, when that same community where his lynching occurred used his memory as inspiration for becoming a community more committed to the ideals of truth, justice, and reconciliation. This historical marker unveiling was a part of Coos Bay's first ever Juneteenth celebration. And just 1 year later, Coos Bay's 2022 Juneteenth celebration grew into a 3-day event where they unveiled a historical marker about the diverse Beaver Hill mining community and allowed African Americans from their community and the surrounding area to showcase their history, tradition, and culture, all a part of their renewed effort to tell more diverse stories in their local history. The celebration of Juneteenth in Coos Bay is another chapter in Alonzo Tucker's story. This is why I say his story ends in hope. His story represents the hope that we can find peace and justice for our history of racial injustice. We need not feel powerless to this history because we have the power to write new endings to these stories. Here in Grants Pass, there is a history of being a sundown town, but that history does not have to be the end to the story. Just like Alonzo Tucker, the ending to the story of a sundown town can be rewritten. None of our stories are over. Legacies are created by the stories we tell, and you can be a part of making Alonzo Tucker a legend. There is only one known picture of Alonzo Tucker, and his face can be seen on this pendant on my chest. I hope you'll come up to me after this event so that you can put a face to the name of a man who inspires us all to become communities more committed to the ideals of truth, justice, and reconciliation. Remember this: R.I.P. Alonzo Tucker. May he one day rest in power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Our next storyteller is Sylvia Marr, and Sylvia is a graduate of Hidden Valley High School and Willamette University, where she studied politics and communication. She currently works as an administrative assistant at the Redwood Foundation for Education. She is involved with the Unitarian Universalists of Grants Pass and the Grants Pass Remembrance Project. Sylvia's story is Tennis Anyone? Please help me welcome Sylvia.
I must say I've spent many evenings trying not to disappoint Kate Campbell on this very stage, so I'm going to continue to do that. Thank you for being here, everyone. 2 years ago, it feels like yesterday, I was playing tennis at my university, Willamette. I was playing number one doubles with my teammate Sarah, and we had a pretty good record together. We were in a really close match, and we ended up going into a tiebreaker. We were 2 points away from winning. I was on the baseline, on the ad side, ready to return the serve. Came to my backhand. I took a split step and a step forward to return it. And instead of returning it, I felt 2 pops in my knee. And not only did I feel them, I heard them. Noises coming from my knee. I dropped my racket, fell to the ground, and started screaming. And it's Salem, so it's rainy, so we were indoors. So my screams were, echoing around the court. It's really, really wonderful. And all I remember thinking is, I don't want to look down and see that my leg is no longer attached to my body. So my eyes were shut. I was not moving. I was really still. And apparently my body's way of telling people that something was wrong was the intermittent screaming, just constantly for several minutes, my friends have told me. But that's all that my brain would think, is something is wrong and they need to know. How am I supposed to tell them? They need to know something is wrong. So I felt my teammates surround me. I heard the coaches running around. We need ibuprofen. Should we call an ambulance? Where does it hurt? And I could feel Alyssa's hand on my back, and Sarah was holding my hand, and Paisley was patting my head. And finally, what I heard was, "Where's Dylan?" And Dylan was the athletic trainer that was supposed to be there for the match, in case of injury. And then I heard he left. So Dylan was not there when I got hurt. But eventually, as I was on the ground, he showed up, 10 minutes later. And they got me up, and they took me to the sidelines, and they sat me down, they gathered all my things, and they said, can we keep playing? Do you mind if we finish the match? Was I gonna say no? No. And then, for reasons I will never understand, we were playing Pacific Lutheran University, and so they got in a little huddle, in their circle, in their team, and they put their hands in, and they said, 3, 2, 1, go Lutz. Poor taste, in my opinion, very, very poor taste to cheer, for my busted knee. But and then they took me to the viewing area outside the courts, sat me on the ground because I couldn't bend my knee, so straight on the ground. Dylan brought me a brace, wrapped up my knee. It was probably large grapefruit size by this time, really swollen and warm. And he had crutches for me and got me up and said, "Do you know how to use crutches?" And I said, "Yeah," because how hard could it be? And so, of course, I get on there and I start to fall, and he caught me because he knew that I was going to fall because crutches are not easy to use. And Paisley drove me home, got me up to my room, brought all my things, and left. And I was alone with my injured knee. I had no idea what was going on in there, in a straight locked brace, and I had to figure out what I was going to do. And mostly what I did for 2 days was cry in bed. That was fun. And the next thing I did was email my professor, and I said, can I please get an extension on this assignment? I'd never asked for an extension in my life, but I got hurt really badly. And she said, of course, Sylvia, I'm so sorry. I actually have been hurt playing tennis as well. I hit myself in the head with my racket super hard. So you can tell me what happened, because it won't be more embarrassing than what I did. And so then I had an MRI. It took about 2 weeks to get one, and then a few more days waiting. Excruciating to have no idea what's going on and wait. I like to know things, and so not knowing things was really hard for me. Turns out I had a complete anterior cruciate ligament tear, ACL, a partial meniscus tear, and an impaction fracture. So apparently when a ligament in your knee tears, the bones hit together and can cause a fracture. Yeah, physics is incredible, everybody. And Dylan, the trainer, talked me through the results, and bless his heart, he didn't tell me anything before we got the results, as much as I begged him to take a guess and tell me what was wrong so I could Google it. He would not. But what he did tell me is that the inside of my knee looked like crab meat. And he told me that about every single day, that it looked like crab meat in there. So thank you, Dylan. What I realized pretty quickly was what I couldn't do. I couldn't take out my own trash. I couldn't get my own food. I couldn't fulfill my duties as a resident advisor, which paid for my room and board at college. And I couldn't move. I couldn't walk. I had to learn to use crutches. Have any of you used crutches before? Awful. Great, but awful. I had bruises all under my arms, on my elbows. My hands were covered in blisters, and my left leg was covered in bruises and scratches from the brace knocking in to the other side. All these things I learned from my injury. And then, one of the things that this experience has taught me is to ask for help. That's really hard. And accepting help, right, is different than asking for help. But I had to rely on other people. And that is not something that I like to do, because I like to rely on myself. But not being able to do any of the things that I needed to survive, I had to accept help. That was rough. And I had to learn how to go through double doors. That's hard. We need automatic doors, folks. My uncle from Michigan sent me flowers after my injury, and I had to go through 5 sets of doors to get outside the building into the parking lot. Don't ask me how I did it, but I got back up to the room with the vase under my arm too, so it worked out. And there are also a lot of ifs to my story, right? If I didn't live in a dorm with an elevator, if I didn't go to a private university that had athletics insurance to cover what my insurance didn't cover, it's a big number. I'm not going to tell you what it was. My brace was $1,000. I'll tell you that right now. If I didn't have Dylan, who taught me that if you don't straighten your leg before your surgery, you will not be able to straighten it after your surgery. How was I going to know that? You get physical therapy, rehabilitation after, but sometimes for surgery you need to prepare. So I think Dylan every day in my mind. If I didn't have parents that let me move back home and took care of me when I cried because my hair tie wasn't in reach or my ice machine needed to be refilled, if my mom didn't wash my hair when I couldn't take a shower, all these things that if there wasn't a pandemic and I couldn't go to virtual class, I don't know how I would have finished my degree. And there were services set up to deliver food to my room because kids were in quarantine. So it all worked out. I wish it hadn't happened, but if it happened, it was at a good time. Yay, COVID. So, yeah. I'm not telling you all this to make you feel bad for me. I'm telling you because it made me realize how lucky I am and how many good things are in my life. And sometimes I forget that, and sometimes you forget that. We all do, right? And for me, it took absolutely destroying my knee to realize that I had a lot of good things. And then when I lost them, I had to work really hard to get them back. And I also learned that I can be struggling and other people can be struggling, and both things can be true. It was a really hard time in the world, and I was talking to the chaplain at Willamette because I needed support mentally and physically. And she said, Sylvia, you can not be okay, and you don't have to worry about everyone else, but you also don't have to forget about everyone else. Both can be happening at the same time, and both are valid. So I don't want you to leave here tonight thinking tennis is dangerous, we need to stick to pickleball, because the morning of my surgery, the doctor came in and he said, don't tell anyone this, so I'm gonna tell you all. And he said, the knee that I repaired before yours belonged to a firefighter. And guess how he tore his ACL? Playing pickleball. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Our next storyteller is Ron Gillespie, and Ron is the owner of Gillespie Hair Design and has been in the hair business for over 20 years. He currently teaches the youth at the Oregon Youth Authority the art of barbering and cosmetology, which is, by the way, where I got my clipboard from the OYA, from the students there. Ron is originally from Southern California, and the title of Ron's story is Hair Today and Gone Tomorrow. Please help me welcome Ron.
Well, hello, everybody. Okay. I'm Ron, and I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be up here and to hear all these wonderful stories and experience the Civil War band. Thank you guys, you're wonderful. My story is one of a journey, and I would say that the title of tonight being that the ending is still going is pretty appropriate. For me, my story started out being raised by two professionals in the household. My mother is a retired school teacher who taught mostly in the U.S. and then also in Germany as well. And my dad is a retired aerospace propulsion engineer manager. So growing up with two academics like that was pretty tough. They were always very much like pointing my sister and I to walk a fine line and to do all these amazing things. And that was quite tough because my upbringing was mainly around mostly the environment that I lived in, the schools that I went to, and everything around me was predominantly not people of color. My subdivisions that I lived in and all that were mainly around Caucasian people. So growing up with a lot of that, it was very tough because the only people that I identified with were maybe like the majority of the people that I was around. And so the people that looked like me were very, very much the people that I really, I wasn't used to seeing anybody that looked like me. And that was a really kind of a unique experience. So for most of my childhood and graduating, I really didn't see myself as a person of color. I didn't see myself as really white, Hispanic. I'm a black African-American male, I do that. But that wasn't something that I really kind of was something that was, I thought about all the time. Which leads me to kind of like tell my story a little bit. So, that being the way that I grew up, after I graduated high school, I ended up going into college for a couple of years, and then I pursued professional jobs and landed some great corporate jobs and did very, very well, but I could never quite climb that corporate ladder. I did very well, had 401ks, bought bonds. I worked in aerospace, I worked for Boeing, I worked for big nonprofits that managed the budgets for Head Start. Worked for Costco for many years, over 20 years worked for Costco. And created quite a nice 401k and did quite well. Went through 9/11, did a lot of things, 57 years old. And now I reflect on the decisions that I made. When I was in the corporate world, I thought, you know what, this isn't going for me. I ended up pursuing a career in being the hair industry. So I'm a professional, hair care professional, and I also, I have it's basically a teaching degree from the higher HECC. So I'm able to go into OYA and work with youth and move them towards becoming professional hair care people. So I test them on the state level, and it's really a quite nice experience. It's actually everything that I thought I wanted my professional career to be, without the stuffiness, the sitting behind the desk, and the crunching numbers and all that. I get a chance to work directly with people that are a lot like the type of people that I grew up with, like myself. I got into a lot of trouble. My family, they did quite well, but they eventually divorced. So I spent a lot of time just, I don't know, trying to figure out what direction I was going to go in. So that being the case, now I look at how things are going, and I'm here now. I'm a hair care professional, and I'm doing my thing. So now I'm starting to really realize that I'm not in Southern California anymore. I'm in Oregon, and this is predominantly like the group that I grew up with when I was in high school. And so I'm comfortable with this group. But the difference is that the people that I'm interacting with on a regular basis, now they see me as a person of color a lot more than I see myself as a person of color, which is very unique because I didn't really see myself as anything. I just seen myself as just a regular Joe. But I didn't really realize it until I'm working and I'm doing the things that we all do in life. And people would come up to me and they would stop and they would say, "What are you doing here? Do you work?" And they would really entrench themselves in conversations with me. And to me, I thought that was like, wow, what a unique experience. This person's coming up to me and they're very interested in me. But later on in life, I started to really realize after 1 or 2 years of this is that actually they were just really identifying me as an African American gentleman and as a person of color. And to me, I had never experienced that before. It was really quite unique. My story is one of I'm a resilient person. I'm a person that kind of just goes with the flow. And this is a situation that I encountered over and over and over again in my life. even to this day, I'm a business owner. I've owned multiple businesses downtown. I have lots of interaction with my clients, my customers. Some of them I see 4 times a month in my chair. And this story is the same. It's not a negative one, it's just one of curiosity, it's one of identification, it's one of being identified, and then myself identifying with myself. And really, that's not a bad thing. You know, for me, being raised predominantly in a situation where I was not around people of color like myself, it was just an enlightening experience, because now I was able to really kind of like, normalize the situation and see that, you know what, this is a part of life. This is what we deal with. And I experience this on a regular basis. I work in my shop, and now I cut people's hair, Rogue Barbers is the business that, one of the businesses that myself and my family own. It's a very big barber shop, very popular. I stand behind my chair in the window right by the sidewalk. And this is the most unique situation, is that now, as an African American person, a person of color, in a predominantly area that's not very many people that look like me. I was standing there cutting hair, and it's a normalizing situation. Maybe not as normal for some people, but it's becoming more normal, which is a good thing. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges. I get people on a regular basis that I might have interactions with them. In my classroom, I get young people, and they might say, hey, I really am struggling with this particular thing. And they don't seek out my help. Sometimes they seek out the students' help that are right there with them. They're not very interested or motivated to have those kind of interactions with me. And sometimes it's for a lot of reasons, but sometimes it's just something that they grew up with. And it's something that, at that time, they just can't get past. But I'm there because I want to be there. Just like I want to cut hair in the window and normalize these situations so that, it becomes normal for me and it becomes normal for the people that I'm around. So, yeah, the ending is still going, so we'll see what happens next. So, thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Ron. Right before intermission, we have music, and the music is by Tom Fitzgerald, and his is life, love, songwriter, and producer. And his song tonight is Sweet Little Mystery. So I get set up here. Kate, what do we do without you? You're awesome.
Well, the band moved us.
And they'll be back.
Hello. Friends all tell me that I look so sad. They don't have to ask me why. They know the reason that I feel this bad. Since the day you said goodbye. Not the letters you write. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're now going to have a 15-minute intermission. So stories are a great time for among ourselves to kind of tell ourselves stories among each other. So I encourage you to visit with some people, maybe find some people that you've never met before. And there's some water out in the narthex there. And we'll be back about 10 after 8. So enjoy yourself. Thank you. 60-second warning, please. Yeah. I hate to break up these wonderful stories, but if you can take your seats, we'll get started for the second half. You help get us going. Maybe you can help get us going.
Thank you.
This is always the hardest part, is to break up these wonderful stories that I know are being told. Okay. Well, please help me welcome back Tom Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Changing light, a shifting moon, a floating leaf, a deja vu, empty beams, storm swept hill, familiar grace, autumn chill, there's frost on ground, half full glass. Gift of time, it's fading fast. Joy of love that fills this room. The autumn sun, it sets too soon. Might hold me in a trance that will linger until time stands still. Of her smile, time stands still, and seasons dance around this autumn chill. Empty beach and swept hill, familiar grace, autumn chill. Might hold me in a trance that will linger until time stands still. There's just one passing glance, of her smile, time stands still, and seasons dance around this autumn chill. Seasons dance
The changing light, the shifting moon. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Lutz Kramer, and Lutz is a California transplant who loves to travel, but also loves returning to Rogue Valley after his adventures. He's a proud fellow member, of Rogue Gateway Rotary, and enjoys participating in the community service events that Rotary provides. Not content with retirement, Lutz is working on half a century of teaching at Rogue Community College. His story is the never-ending dialogue. Please help me welcome Lutz.
You notice that some of my fans over here, I rented them. You can get them for $20 a person. When people ask me why I keep teaching, why I keep coming back for more, I have to tell them that it's about the dialogue. I love the dialogue that I have with my students and with my colleagues and in many ways with my past self. So let me run through a little bit of my past self, my search for identity that keeps me going and searching in relation to this dialogue. So we'll start with a 4-year-old Nazi. I came to this country in 1949. It wasn't real popular to be German in the US at that time. I was sent out to play with the other kids, playing army. Guess who got to be the Nazi and get shot? So recognizing that it was important to not have rocks thrown at me, I suggested that we maybe play War in the Pacific instead. So it was an early attempt to realizing that I had this identity that was being put on me, and it was painful having rocks thrown at me, so maybe I could switch it and do something else. Elementary school was kind of a bubble for me. It was the time of Lawrence Welk and Father Knows Best, and I was taught about the U.S. being a melting pot and so on. It all seemed very nice and neat. Looking back to my self at that time, I realized that it wasn't really a melting pot that I was involved in, but something more of a stew with a common kind of a base, but individual elements, individual vegetables and pieces of meat and so on. Moving into high school, there began to be some cracks in the bubble. Began to notice the other. We had a fairly large Hispanic population in my high school, and they didn't always get along with the Anglos, and vice versa. So I began to think about all of these different kind of identities that people had. I pretty much stayed away from the problems that were happening, except for one guy, Jack Agape, who was the bad Leroy Brown of my high school. And as luck would have it, I ended up with a locker right below Jack's. Now maybe luck had nothing to do with it. Brenda would tell you that it's the universe showing me something, teaching me how to deal with things. Well, one day I happened to bump him a little bit, and he grabbed me, put me up against the locker, and said, "Don't ever touch me." If I had known the language at the time, I would have said, "Hey, chill, dude." But I realized that saying anything was probably going to get my skinny little body put in that locker. So I pretty much ignored it. But looking back again, coming back to that early self, we laugh about the fact that he spelled his name Agape, just like the Christian agape. So we look at the irony of that whole thing, and maybe, Brenda, you're right, maybe it was a universe telling me something. University was another broadening aspect, multicultural kind of a thing at Berkeley. I think one of the biggest things I learned about multicultural kinds of situations there, however, was that many of my fraternity brothers were pretty racist. And in retrospect, I wish that I had stood up a little more for things that I was already believing in at that time, instead of just letting things slide by. But the biggest event during my university years involved my draft board. I had a draft notice sitting on my desk and realized that I was going to have to make some decisions about it. So I talked to a draft counselor at Cal, and she said, look, you're sending money home to your mother, and so you fall into the hardship deferment kind of a place. I've got all the paperwork and so on here to help you with it. And she was great in terms of telling me what to expect when I went in for my meeting and so on. As I was in the waiting room, a young Hispanic kid came in, and we got into a conversation, and he was trying to get exactly the same deferment that I was, but he knew nothing about what was going on with it. He assumed he could just go in, ask the board for it, and they would give it to him, and he'd be on his way. So I tried to give him a crash course, tried to tell him what to expect in terms of questions, told him maybe the best thing for him would be to see if he could come back again, having some paperwork with him. But on my ride home that day, I began to think about what kind of privilege I had. And I thought about this privilege not necessarily in terms of what I had, but in terms of what he didn't have. And it's always kind of haunted me that maybe this young man went to Vietnam in my place. So looking back each time, you know, that you start thinking about stuff that happened in the past, and reassessing what went on with it is a big part of the dialogue that I go through with that old me. After getting a job and teaching, it's been an incredible career. I've had a lot of chance to travel, had a chance to teach overseas twice. I taught in Denmark for a year and then taught in Taiwan. And the dialogue there gets even bigger. Now I'm talking with people that have different cultural anchors than I do. In Denmark, I learned from my Danish students that the word hygge, which translates in the dictionary as being pleasant or something of that sort, they said, no, it's much more than that. They'd come in and say, Lutz, these fluorescent lights, these are not hygge. Candles are hygge. And I began to get a sense for that cultural anchor that the Danes have there, which permeates their entire culture. The way they do their flowers, the way they do their doorways, and so on. In Taiwan, I had great discussions with my colleagues about how different it must be to get ideas via characters rather than via words. And as one of them explained to me, he said, look at the verb to listen. In English, it's just there, that verb, a couple of words, to and listen. He says, look at the character for listen in Mandarin. He said there's the character for ear, the character for mouth, which is what you'd expect. But he said, we also include the character for heart. And I thought, how incredible that is to think about looking at that character, and realizing that if you're really planning to listen to somebody, you've got to do it with your heart as well. It's not just a physical kind of thing. I had an experience a couple of months ago in my class that really gets at the whole issue of dialogue. I came in that morning and said, I've got an idea that I want to do something different today than what we've got on the syllabus. And one of my students who's had me for a number of classes said, oh no, not something that you came up with at 3 a.m. again, is it? Because I have these epiphanies at 3 a.m. That become really important. And so I said, all right, what I want you to do is write down a definition of woke. I said, there's a word that you hear a lot in the news and everything. What does that word mean to you? And so they all got their definitions down. And I said, okay, now decide whether it's a vice or a virtue. And they both, or all of them said, oh man, what are we supposed to do with that? And I said, what help can Aristotle give you for it? And we had just finished studying Aristotle, and Aristotle talks about how virtues aren't just the opposite of a vice, but that they're on an arc between two vices. So, for instance, the virtue of courage is on an arc between being a coward on the one end and being foolhardy on the other. And so, as Aristotle argues, it's a question of doing the right thing in the right place at the right time with the right people. And that's the hard thing to figure out in terms of a virtue. I've always used as an example of courage the way that Aristotle would do it, the young Chinese man who stood in Tiananmen Square in front of that tank and bared his chest. Some people might say that was pretty foolhardy, but to me, it was a real act of courage because he knew they weren't going to blow him away on public television. So they got busy working on this, trying to figure out what woke would be like as a virtue, since most of them considered it a virtue. The ones that didn't were having a hard time trying to figure out as a vice what it was a virtue in relation to. So basically what they ended up with was, on the one end is keeping your head in the sand, not dealing with issues at all. At the other end of the arc was something like political correctness or goody two-shoes or something of that sort. So for them, and I'm writing all of this up on the board, and they're one after another, giving me things to write. And suddenly somebody from the back of the room said, Lutz, are you woke? And I turned around and I said, I am woke AF. And they cracked up, and in the midst of all of the laughter, the dialogue continues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lutz. Our next storyteller is Trevor Yarrish. Trevor is a loving husband, father, and active community member. Passionate about contributing to his community, he founded The Hive, a multifunctional co-working space and venue that hosts educational workshops and community events and a live concert. Trevor is also a founder and CEO of Zeal, which is an enterprise web and mobile software development company. Trevor's drive and passion for creating amazing experiences for other people has led him on some incredible adventures. Tonight he will be sharing a story from one of those adventures. His story is titled Rise from the Ashes. Please help me welcome Trevor.
Well, Lutz, you're a tough act to follow, buddy, but I'll give it my best. First, I just want to say thank you for having me. This is a real honor. These are two organizations, the Hearth, two projects, the Hearth and GP Remembrance, that I hold dear to my heart, and I really appreciate having these here in Grants Pass. We're all so blessed and lucky to have nights like this, evenings like this, where we get to share stories around the hearth, and support organizations that are really poised for good and transformation. So let's have a hand for all the people involved. Yes. So my story starts on a hot August night in 2004. I was at a friend's wedding, and I remember it was so hot. It was an outdoor wedding, and it was one of those nights where you're overdressed because it's a wedding. But so people are like, okay, I'm done with this overshirt, and people are fanning each other, and super hot. All of a sudden, ceremony's over. The partying has begun, and I get a phone call. And the phone call was a coworker of mine, in like sort of a panic state, saying, Trevor, you've got to come right now. You've got to come right now. So what do you mean I'm at a wedding? I'm at a friend's wedding, and it's like 6:30 at night, and like, what do I have to come to work for right now? The place is on fire. You got to come. It's sort of like a all hands situation. You've got to come right now. I was like, okay, I'll come right now. So I say goodbye really quick. I got in my car, and I drove down to, at the time, I worked for a company, a small little coffee company called Dutch Bros Coffee. And I had worked for the company for a number of years at this point. And I had moved up into a marketing position with the company. And so I was like part of the admin staff at this point. And on this night, I arrived to what was, it was a newish endeavor. It was the largest warehouse that this company had ever had at this point. Finally grew up. There were 3 roasters. The entire admin staff now had places to be that weren't spread amongst different buildings all over the place. And I pull up, and it was a surreal experience. At this point, people are starting to gather. There's a big field next to this warehouse. And I just remember pulling in and walking down the driveway, and they stopped. They made us all park way over here, and then there's this big field over here, and we couldn't get close, obviously. But it's frantic. Firefighters are still hard at work, and the place is just engulfed in flames. And I remember walking up, and like I said, there's people gathering, and people are arriving, and at this point there's probably 30 to 40 people already there. By the end of the night, there was 150 people gathered around. But I remember walking up and feeling just sort of overwhelmed by the experience. Fire is burning, and it's not just burning, but it's at that moment where the firefighters are essentially retreating, right? The roof is about to collapse, and they're getting each other out of the building. There's injuries already, and the ambulances are showing up now, and it's like, oh my gosh, there was no one killed in the fire or seriously injured, but some firefighters did get injured from some falling debris. And I just remember this moment is just like being overwhelmed, and people are huddled in small groups, holding each other, watching the devastation, crying, and feeling just overtaken by this experience. And there was all this sorrow and fear, and it was at that moment, like when we're in moments like that, we look to our leaders. And I remember I come walking up, and I look over, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go. Like, what group am I going to walk up to first? Who am I going to go join, console, cry with, whatever it may be, but just like be in awe of this massive fire that's in front of us, and basically our livelihoods and everything we know about this company. It was about 90% of the back end of this company. It was the entire, all of the inventory, the roasting facility, even like the only thing that they were able to go in and run out with was one computer which had the financials on it, right? It was and this was before cloud computing was a big thing. So they learned a lot about backups, off-site backups in this experience. But I remember looking, and there was a man who was a mentor of mine, and his name was Dane. I'm sure many people in this room remember Dane. And Dane, he was a mentor. He was one of the founders of the company. We all called him the wise man because he was a wise man. I mean, I guess the name was appropriate. But I remember on this night, in this moment, I look over and Dane is in one of these groups and he is frozen in this moment. It's overtaken him, and he sees this thing that he built and spent all of this time, invested, heartache, blood, sweat, and tears, and money, lots of money, and time, and built this thing. And he's also not, at this point in his life, he wasn't, a young pup, right? This was his livelihood. This was his whole, this was his retirement. This was his life at this point. And he was overtaken, and you can't blame him in that moment for being frozen by this and feeling despair, feeling overtaken by it. And my heart, I wanted to go there with his family, and there were friends in proximity. And then out of the corner of my eye over here, I see another person who was Travis Boersma. I'm sure many people know Travis, right? Travis, which was Dane's younger brother, at the time, he was not seen as the wise man, but he was, he had energy. He was really responsible for pushing growth and those types of things. And so in this moment, while all of these people are overtaken by fear and grief and despair and this overwhelming, surreal experience, Travis is in the back, behind all of these people, about 20 yards, with two people sort of walking behind him, and he's on his phone, and he's just pacing on his phone, talking, and there's people following him. Somebody's following him, texting. Somebody's following him, writing stuff down. And I was so curious, and it was this juxtaposition between these two these two groups of people, which there was 3 back here and 40 up here, and I just wandered back here because I was curious. And Travis was back there on the phone, lining up and calling companies in Portland and Seattle, roasters and other facilities that have Dixie, our suppliers. And at 7 o'clock at night, he's on the phone getting people to agree and signing deals and making partnership deals and discussing options that would ensure that the doors open the next day at every location. That would ensure that we all had jobs the next week. And I'll never forget, in that moment, it was that was just such a major life lesson for me. That there was courage, and there was resilience, and he was back there doing what he could do in that moment to make sure that we moved on, right? And fast forward a couple of years, I was introduced to a philosophy, Stoicism, and it gave me words for this experience. And so some of the principles of philosophy it's simple at its core. It's basically perception. It's an awareness and an understanding of what it is that you control. What is it that you're actually in control of? And when you really boil that down, you realize that it's only a couple of things. It's what something means to me, right? And the actions I take as a response to that. And you get to determine and frame what something means to you when you experience it, see it, hear it, feel it. And then the next piece of it is, and when you know that, when you understand that, what it is that you actually control, your responsibility is to only focus on those things, right? Not necessarily to never feel fear or sadness, but in that moment, it's to focus on what it is that I can do. I can't do anything about this fire, but Travis in that moment, he couldn't do anything about the fire, but he could, in that moment, he said, well, what can I do? And he picked up the phone and he started calling people to make sure that we had a future to look forward to. And on that night, $1.5 million in damage was done in that fire. And you fast forward 20 years, and that company is now worth $1.5 billion. And I believe that night was a pivotal experience, a pivotal moment in that company's history where it could have been over. It could have collapsed and failed that night because that was an overwhelming experience for a company of that size that was trying to grow at that moment. And that was a big step. This warehouse with these new roasters, this was a big step for the company. And it was a massive blow, massive loss. But that wasn't the end, right? That was not the end of that story. And that story continued to this day and continues to grow. And it reminds me of a saying that comes from Stoicism. It's memento mori, which translates to remember death. And at first, it can sound like a morbid thing or something like that instills fear. But it's not intended to do that. It's intended to instill, it's intended to inspire you. It's intended to wake you up. And how many people in here have had a near-death experience? Right? What was that next day like? My gosh. I am alive today, and there's a whole different breath that you take that next day. And I believe that with Memento Mori, the goal of it is to ponder your death so that you can have that moment every day. I'm here. I'm so glad I'm alive. What am I going to do with that? And many times when I talk to people who had near-death experiences, I hear that it's like life is new, and I'm going to do everything. I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm going to say I love you to. There's nothing more beautiful than pondering your death and realizing that you still have life. And on that night, that was the near-death experience. And there was the next day, the company was so inspired by the fact that we all had jobs and didn't just have jobs. He called an all hands the next day on site and said, this will not kill us. We will make sure of that. You all go to work and serve our customers. We'll take care of this. And it was an amazing experience, and again, shaped a lot about who I am and how I run my businesses and why I run my businesses. And I'll never forget that night. And the end is still going.
Thank you, Trevor. Our last speaker, is David West. And David was the Native American Studies Director at Southern Oregon University until his retirement in 2015. He taught core courses in Native American Studies, offering insight into both historical perspectives as well as contemporary Native American issues. His advocacy efforts for Native American Indian education in Oregon is evidenced by the success of residential Native American youth. Summer Academy held on the university campus. This academy is a model program in Oregon in the West Coast. David is a member of the Oregon Indian Education Association, the National Indian Education Association, the National Congress of American Indians, and serves as the institutional representatives. David's story is the dedication of the Native American Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Please help me welcome David.
When I first walked in, and I saw the blue coats were here, I thought, left my bows and arrows at home. Yeah. So we'll just have to go with a fry bread. How's that? Okay. Bonjour. Nikonji. Anin. Nanijina. Yeah, wabaskibanish. Chiltanen. Andakstrish. Anishnabeg, Nijnabeg, Borowadme, Kankaki, Wabash Pish. I said to you, hello, my friends, how are you tonight? We're an oral tradition people, and so the only way that we had to communicate was to talk to each other. So I taught all of my courses at the university in the oral tradition. That doesn't always jive very well with teacher standards and practices, but oh well. We've had our system of education for, let's see, I think they just discovered some new remains, puts us here between 20 and 22,000 years. That's a pretty long time for those languages to exist. I said to you, Anin Nanijina. Anin Nanijina means I see your light, my relatives. That means we see your inner light. Each person has their inner light, and it represents the fire in life that we all have, and the fire of survival that warms us from day to day. I also said to you my name, white like old eagle. We didn't have a word for gray. My brother, I found you, who likes to go new places to sing and dance for a good time. Those that know me know that I am named very appropriately, and I'm thankful to that representation. I said to you I'm from the Anishinaabe people, more commonly known as the Algonquin nations, and the Nijnaabeg Bodawadme. And the Nijnaabeg Bodawadme are the people of the place of the fire, the Potawatomi, in English, but in our language, we are Nijnaabeg Bodawadme. Also said that we come from the area of the Kankakee and Wabash rivers, and we are connected to the water in all things. Back in November of last year, my extended family brother from the Oneida Ojibwe nations in Duluth, Minnesota. My tribes are on Potawatomi, Miami, and Kickapoo, and we come from originally from the eastern side of Lake Michigan, and were later moved by incursions from the east down into the upper portions of Illinois and Indiana, around Green Bay, and in the area where the Menominee Reservation currently stands in Wisconsin. Bob and I are both veterans. I served with the United States Air Force from 1969 to 1972. I left for the Air Force on Thanksgiving Day in 1969. The next day was my report date for the draft. And in 1969, most of the people that came from Southern Oregon into the military during the Vietnam War went immediately to basic training and were shipped to Vietnam within 6 to 12 weeks. It wasn't a very good time for us. I learned a lot in the Air Force. I had a great time being there. I was in the combat engineers. We took our training with the Seabees in Port Hueneme, California. 150 Air Force guys and 4,000 to 5,000 Navy. We got a pretty tough time from the Navy. But you know, it's really hard to catch those zoomies. We go much faster than those boats. We're gone. We got a chance to go to Washington for the dedication of the Native American Veterans Memorial. The memorial stands on the edge of the Smithsonian Squares, just outside the National Museum of the American Indian. It's a beautiful structure. And because we had all served, we went for 7 days. Took my godson, my nephew, exposed him to what Native American people have done in the service to our country. Native American people, the indigenous people of North America, have been serving in the United States military since the Spanish-American War on a continual basis, and in earlier wars and conflicts between the British, the French, and the Americans. We have the highest rate per capita, that's by population, of military service of any race of people in the nation. That continues to this day. We make up 1% of the population of the nation, our home. The indigenous people. We never had anything to recognize our service. We had Ira Hayes, the sacrifice of his life. Died from alcoholism and 6 inches of water in a lonely ditch. We didn't have a whole lot of Native American heroes that were put up in front of the nation. We didn't have a whole lot of Medal of Honor recipients. We still don't. We particularly don't have any medals of honor during the Indian Wars, but we have eagle feathers. Those eagle feathers have to be earned by service. There has to be a deed that's witnessed by someone else and told about what they saw that earns that eagle feather, that earns that place of a warrior. And warrior doesn't come with us every day. Warrior comes when danger threatens. The rest of the time, we're dad, grandpa, uncle, brother, sister, auntie, grandma. Providers. That's the long-term thing of who we are. Providers, each and every day, nurturers of our families and our communities. When danger threatens, we become that warrior. There's no higher honor than to lay down the life that you carry that was gifted to you by the breathmaker in defense of your people and the innocent ones, the elders, the old people, the children, the mothers. We went there with that background, with that teaching, with that commonality between just the four of us. We didn't know quite what to expect. The three of us older brothers are disabled. So we all had our canes. And we're gumping around Washington, D.C. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Washington, D.C., but they have the steepest escalators of any place that I've ever seen in my life. You got to lean back because you're not going to go on your nose. You got to lean forward when you're going up to make sure you don't go over backwards. And they're very steep, and the wind blows like crazy there, and it rains, and I was glad to get back to Oregon. We walked all over that town. We looked at everything. We went by the big buildings. We went by the White House. We went by the Senate. We went by the Capitol. We went over here. We went over there. And we started looking. We said, this is kind of different. Every one of the federal government buildings, every one of them was white. A lot of the others were red brick. What does this say? The White House. Wow. Where are the people of color represented? Where are the Indians whose land this was represented in Washington, D.C.? So we tried to find some of those places. Well, there's NAMI, and it's a beautiful place, and I encourage you to go there if you ever get the opportunity. The history of our lives in this Mother Earth land is in that building. The Veterans Memorial is built immediately adjacent to the museum. And we were standing outside on the day before the dedication. And there was going to be a big procession the next day. Big processional with eagle staffs and flags and color guards from the different tribes in the nation. They expected a lot of people. We were excited. So we went there to sign up and find out where we were supposed to line up, what time we were supposed to be there, and where was the donuts. Get the important things taken care of. How long do we have to stand in line? How many veterans out there? Did I see it? You know that? Remember that line standing? We were standing by the memorial, in front of the memorial. The memorial is a big, beautiful, silver circle. It's gorgeous. It's big. There's a small reflecting pool there. And by this time in the week, my brothers and I and my godson, we'd been to all the rest of the memorials. And we walked. We wanted to honor our ancestors. And so we walked all around there. We went to the Lincoln Memorial. We were going to go way up in the thing, but the elevator was broke. You ever see how many steps are on the front of the Lincoln Memorial? That's a long ways when you're on a cane. Your legs don't work so good anymore. But we'd been there and we'd seen all of these memorials. We'd been deeply moved. We'd been moved to tears, been moved to song, to sing songs of celebration and warrior songs to those that lost their lives in defense of our country, to ensure our freedoms. So we're standing out there and we're looking at this big circle. There's a fire in the bottom of the circle. Represents the fire that burns within that light, anin, that I just spoke of. There's a small little reflecting pool there. And it reflects the fire. And that fire then reflects off of the water onto the silver of the circle. The circle represents the medicine wheel and life. The circle of life. No beginning and no end in a circle. Perfectly round. They told us that there would be no more memorials built in that area between there and the Capitol building, because the Capitol building is perfectly framed in the center of that circle of the Native American Veterans Memorial. And so on that day that we're signing up, there's about 30, 35 of us standing around there looking at the memorial. Beautiful day. Up in front of us, there's this elder gentleman. So you can imagine guys like me seeing an elder gentleman up there. This guy's 140 years old. Beautiful young man. He turned around to us and he had a Korean veteran hat on. If you do the math, he was 140 years old. He was elderly. But his face was radiant. We found out later he was from the Hopi Nation. And the Hopis had code talkers clear back in the Korean War. He was a Marine veteran, and he served in Korea during the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, which is a very famous battle during that time. And I asked him, I said, have you ever been to Oregon? And he said, yes. He said, there's a man that I was in the Marine Corps with there, that he's an important person. He's a whipman at the Confederated Tribes of Siletz. His name is Gilbert Towner. And I said, yes, I know him very well. He's a very good, close friend of mine. And I've been in training there to be a whipman with him and with some other elders. And I said, I've danced many miles with you, gentlemen, and many miles for you in your experiences. And so my heart was thinking about that man had been in my home. I'm a third generation Oregonian on my dad's side. And my Indian folks came here in 1920. We've been here a long time. We know all about what's hidden in the bushes. Mm-hmm. This little man, he says, so, how many of you veterans over here? 3/4 of the people, their hands go up. He said, how many of you, I want to know, how many of you qualified for your marksmanship, your sharpshooter badge when you were in basic training or in your training? Same hands went up. He said, oh, that's good. He said, how many of you shot M1, M16, M14, 30-06? Hands went up. He said, so I just have this one question. And he very slowly turned around and he looked at that circle. That circle also represents the drum that represents the heartbeat in all life. And peace. Peace songs. War dance songs weren't always for going to war. They were primarily for coming home from war. So that that person could put away the warrior in their wartime bundle and pick up their bundle of the provider and wash away that mask of their face paint to become that regular human being once again, and to beg for forgiveness at the taking of life, because all life is sacred. And that's our teaching. And he said, how many of you on those guns that you qualified with, how many of them had peep sight? If you don't know what a peep sight is, on the back of the gun, there's either a sight with a saddle or a buckhorn, or there's a peep sight that you look through to aim on the front part of the rifle what you're shooting at. He said, what's this remind you of? And made that motion. You could hear the lights go on, snap, 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 all around us. It was an incredible moment. And he said, well, there's just one thing that I have to say about that. He said, right over there, he said, who's in the middle of this circle? Somebody said, the Capitol building. He said, that's right. He said, I've been standing here looking at this for about an hour. He said, I think I understand now why they put it here. Somebody said, why is that? He said, well, the last thing that they see before they go in that building to do business on our behalf is us. The first thing when they come out the front of that building, after they went in there to do business for us, the first thing they see coming out of that building is us, and we're looking back at them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I do appreciate that. I was blessed with this voice that the Creator gave me. And so I came down here to be on an eye level, because we talked about nobody's any better than anybody else. Bombs and bullets do not know the color of the skin, nor do they care. They have no compassion. They have no sorrow. They carry death and destruction. A smile goes a lot farther every one of us is born of a woman with the aid of man. Every one of us matures as a child and grows, becomes maturity. We wither and we return. Every one of us, no matter the color of our skin, no matter where we came from. And just a little side note in history of the world, of the earth herself, no matter what people it is that you come from, or where you come from on the face of the earth, in history, everybody in this room is descended from tribal people who took their living from the land. How different are we from each other? Not much. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you, Hyla. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. To finish out the evening, we're going to hear the Civil War Band, the Battle Cry of Freedom. Please welcome back the Civil War Band. Thank you very much. You know, tonight we heard some great stories about pain and asking for help from each other, how others see us, and also how we see ourselves, getting along with each other, resilience about bouncing back after a tragedy, and how our inner lives are connected, and the sacrifice that goes along with it. And we first started from Taylor talking about that 1902 date with Alonzo Tucker. And the thing with a tombstone, you think of that dash between the day we're born and the day we die. And that's the most important part of our lives, is that dash. And in this case here, where the end is still going, what we can do is forget about that 2023, but also just keep going with the date that we started, and just keep going from here. And just think if Alonzo Tucker was here today in this room, what would he say? It'd be an interesting conversation to have. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our next one at Hearth is going to be on July 13th. The theme will be Some Like It Hot, and the nonprofit will be Siskiyou Field Institute. Have a great evening. Thanks for coming, and also appreciate our online audience as well.